Let's welcome Dr. Mark Krasnow to the show now. Hey, Mark, how's it going?
Going well. How are you?
Well, thanks for asking. So thanks so much for taking the time to hang out in the podcast today, all the way from New Zealand. I know it's tough to make the time zones work. So also, I want to give out a shout out to the listeners in New Zealand, because New Zealand, believe it or not, Mark, is number 5 in our audience for biggest listeners for the Vineyard Underground podcast. So behind the US, Australia, Canada, and the UK, New Zealand, thank you so much for being number 5. You guys are awesome. And you're a listener too, Mark, right?
I am indeed.
All right. That's at least one.
At least one of those many downloads is me.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. So before we talk about crop regulation and fruit thinning strategies, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into viticulture and specializing in plant physiology?
Yeah. Well, I've always been interested in plants and fascinated by plants. Just from some of the basic, plant physiology classes I took in college. But I came to viticulture sort of through the side door. Like many people entering the industry, wanted to be a winemaker. So I studied in the master's program for 2 years, thinking I wanted to be a winemaker, and then took Doug Adams' class on grapevine biochemistry.
And this is at UC Davis?
This was at UC Davis, yeah. And that really opened my eyes to, if you want to affect quality and maximize quality, the big gains can be made in the vineyard, not the winery. That if you really wanted to impact the quality of wines, the vineyard was more important. And so that sort of became my focus. And then, I switched into a PhD focusing on the physiology of ripening, looking at phenolics and yeah.
How about cane versus spur pruned vine? Cane pruned vines, ideally there's less shoot coming out from old wood and than with cordon spur pruned. So do you see differences in your crop regulation needs? And what percentage of your vineyards you work with are cane pruned versus spur pruned?
So Sauvignon Blanc is almost entirely cane pruned. In Marlborough, I can't think of a vineyard that spur prunes have. There's some in other regions. So a lot of my Pinot vineyards have some spurs versus cane. I mean, spur is lovely because you've got more wood, more storage. With cane, your storage is essentially your root system and your trunk, and that's it. You don't have those big, bulky cordons that can have a substantial amount of reserves to them. Yeah. So, if you happen to have more crop than maybe is ideal, the vine can tap into that gas tank a little bit and then hopefully replenish it after harvest if the season allows for that.
But what does the research tell us and your practical experience about fruit removal from shoots during the growing season? So, let's talk about, after shoot thinning, when's the earliest you see growers thinning fruit? Maybe not exactly what you're doing, but let's kind of walk through the different times of year. When I think about it, I typically think, let's get through fruit set first, see what we have. Yeah. And then, you could really theoretically start when you've got very, very small berries, 2 to 4 millimeters. Then we hit what you call lag phase, which is where you stop getting berries expanding from cell division. And then you have this little lag in berry growth, and then the berries will grow from those cells that are expanding within the berry. So some growers like to wait till after or before lag phase. And then some growers will go through maybe around veraison when they see that some clusters are lagging behind in ripeness. I'm kind of laying out the framework to let you dive in and tell me what.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And there's no really right answer here. It's horses for courses for sure.
The pros and cons though of early versus late or things like that.
Yeah. Early thinning is faster because it's a lot easier to find the shoots when the canopy is not fully grown out. Especially if we're talking about the New Zealand context, we can have some pretty dense canopies. We have to leaf pluck, sometimes several times a year. Obviously by machine. We don't have hand labor surpluses here like you do in the States in some places.
You mean the sheep aren't going through and doing all your leaf plucking for you in the fruit zone?
Yeah, there's definitely vineyards that are doing that. 100%. They do an amazing job. You can't leave them in too long. It's all about moving them and stocking rates. And we can have a whole nother talk about sheep and vineyards. I love them in one sense. I hate them in another. So I'm very torn about sheep and vineyards.
Got it. Well, we've got another episode with Kelly Mulville on the Vineyard Underground.
Yeah, that was the one I listened before the Marco one. Yeah, he
Great.
came to a conference here in New Zealand just this last winter and gave a great talk. Like,
Very cool. Cool.
several growers here trying to do permanent sheep grazing in their vineyards, and I've got a client that already has a high wire GVC set up for it. It's perfect. It's the perfect site.
Cool. Well, we use the Watson system. Anyway, I knew this was happening. We're digressing already. But
Yeah,
in another Vineyard Underground episode, we'll
Right.
put it in the show notes on sheep.
Synergy for your podcast, man.
It's great. It's if folks want to know which one to listen to after this one, they know where to go now. But okay, so you're doing leaf removal. That's good because now you can see where the clusters are. You can get a visual on your crop load based on experience. So early versus late, what are the pros and cons?
So pros of early is it's faster, it's easier, but the remaining berries will compensate, right? You know, the vine has a balance. The vine put out the fruit that it thought they was able to ripen given its environment last season. When you go through and you start taking off fruit, you're throwing the vine out of its balance that it has established. And so it tries to reestablish that balance by taking the remaining fruit and making those berries a little bit bigger. You know, there's just more goodness for every berry. So there's a little more cell division, a little more cell expansion. And so at harvest, those berries end up larger. So you kind of undo what you're trying to do. Like the whole point is to remove crop, but then the remaining crop gets heavier. And being able to predict that compensation is hard because there's so many things over the season, rain and temperature and all of this that can affect berry growth. And so if you thin early and the berries compensate too much, you have to thin again. So you end up incurring that cost twice. Ideally, you want to thin just once, get it right, and not have to touch it again.
Yeah.
So I would say more people wait till later for that reason.
Yeah. Also, if your berries are bigger and you have a drought susceptible variety, that could be a negative because you're going to have more berry split potentially or rupt.
Absolutely. And tight bunch cultivars are going to become even tighter. You know, if you've
Right.
got Pinot Gris that you're shoot thinning, at least with the clones we have here, those remaining bunches are just going to be standing out like this. They're not even going to hang because of gravity. You know, they're going to be so tight.